Welcome to Marin Voices and Views. With Lawrence A. Strick, I'm Peter B. Collins. In our second segment in a few minutes, you'll see a lively discussion of Prop 34 on the November ballot, which would replace the death penalty with life without the possibility of parole.
But today, Peter, Steve Kinsey joins us. He serves as the president of the Marin Board of Supervisors, and this year he was elected to his 5th term. His district is the largest in the county, including Corte Madera, portions of Larkspur, Novato, San Rafael, Homestead Valley, San Quentin, and West Marin. He was trained as an architect, and he operated a residential design firm here in the county for about 15 years before he was elected. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks for inviting me.
You bet. Steve, let's start with the budget picture. How is Marin doing? And are you prepared for more cuts from the state? That's been the big unpredictable element the last few years.
You know, one of the primary responsibilities of the Board of Supervisors is to manage a balanced budget, and at the local level we have to have a balanced budget every year, and we do have one. Obviously, the retreat by both the federal government and the state government from funding at the local level creates challenges in the range of $5 to $9 million over the last several years. Each year we've had to reduce services or make adjustments to address that. Marin does have some advantages. We have high property values that, generally speaking, which help us. We've also had a long history of fiscal responsibility around our capital investments, and we don't make investments with one-time money that have ongoing responsibilities. So I'd say we're in a strong position. We're identified as the highest rated county or municipality in the state of California for our bond ratings, which means we're in a strong fiscal position. But there's no question that folks are seeing less services, and more importantly, we're having to shift our investments into our safety net services, which is a key responsibility of the county, and I think it makes sense to address the needs of the most vulnerable.
Which brings up something that I'm hearing about, and it's a fee, and about 15,000 Marin homeowners in the unincorporated areas of the county are going to incur, and that's for firefighting. And can you explain what's going on with that, and who's going to benefit from the service, and where's the money going, and do you agree with this kind of fee?
Well, you know, the fee is a fee that the CAL FIRE, as we call it, the State Department of Forestry's firefighting program, is imposing on any of these state responsibility areas. So if you live within a city, a town, an incorporated area, this fee will not apply. But in unincorporated areas within Marin County, we are what is known as a state responsibility area, so this $150 fee will apply. And there will be a $35 discount for us because we provide direct responsibility to the state for this area with our own county fire department, which means we have a $115 fee, and people will be have received letters letting them know of that at the time very soon. The important message is that firefighting in California is one of the most significant risks that we all face across the state, and California does need to have a budget to fight it. What we object to is this imposition of this fee with no direct benefit coming back to our county residents, and that's the sad reality, is that our county fire folks will be providing those services as they always have been. These fees will move away and go back to the state to fight fires in other communities. So while we have a shared interest in the well-being of all of California, we object to this idea, and we also think that it's actually unconstitutional. And I think that there will be a number of organizations, from taxpayer organizations to individual governments, that will take this case to court, and it'll take us some time, but I think we'll find ultimately that we're successful in defending against this unwarranted fee being imposed.
So the plan now is to have people pay the fee, but fight it in court.
Right, I appreciate you saying that. I strongly recommend folks, regardless of our feelings about it, to pay the fee and avoid the penalties, because you may end up finding that you pay the penalties even if the fee is reimbursed.
Steve, the board approved putting on the ballot in November a local initiative that would increase the sales tax to pay for parks and open space. And you approved it just a few days after Sacramento revealed a $54 million, a couple of funds that had $54 million in the state parks department. What is your thinking about the benefit of this sales tax? And with competing sales tax and other tax measures on the statewide ballot, is this the right time to bring it forward?
Sure, that's a good question that each of us on our board has thought about, and the public has thought about with us before we chose to put this measure on the ballot. I think one of the important aspects of the measure is that the funds are raised locally and will be spent locally, and that the state cannot take the funds away. And I think that's what we're learning more and more, is that's an important safeguard. We'll also have a citizen oversight committee that ensures that the funds would be spent exactly as we lay out in the expenditure plan. I mean, the truth is, Marin County's core identity is around preservation of our natural lands. And we have thousands and thousands of acres of open space preserves. We have important regional parks like Stafford, McGinnis, and Paradise. We have cities and towns that each have their parks. We have 300 miles of trails. Over the years, in the absence of a dedicated funding source for the maintenance of these kinds of facilities and the ranger programs that go with them, we've fallen behind. So our commitment from this generation to the legacy of the generations before us is to take care of what we have and save a small amount for opportunities that might come for protecting important resources like Bald Hill and San Anselmo, or perhaps some of the Baylands, with those additional funds, and complete the dream that voters in 1972 had when they created our open space district.
You got me at Bald Hill. It was named after me.
Aha.
Well, anyway, it sounds like this is money that's being raised by the people of Marin, and it's going to be used here in Marin.
It will be used here in Marin, and I think it's a legacy responsibility, and I think that ultimately the voters will decide whether this is the right time.
So let's talk a little bit about SMART. You gotta. Where do you come in on SMART, and do you think that they're going to have the money to complete the project despite the fact that it's scaled back a little bit? And are they going to do everything they need to do to ensure the safe zones and quiet zones?
Sure. SMART, I think, is on the right track. There's no question that it had some challenges a year ago around fully funding, and they had to make some important decisions about where to prioritize. They have new leadership that is effective. They've had very good bidding environments and have made major contracts in the last year that actually have the tracks under construction and the planning for the stations well underway. So I do believe that voters will get what they were looking for when they passed it by 2/3 majority in both Sonoma and Marin as a whole. In terms of the issues around quiet zones and the other details, like any public works projects, there are going to be things to be worked out. This is an investment for the next 50 years, and there will be a premium that we pay to get started that will pay dividends as we grow. That's the way, and that's the reason that I support SMART.
Steve, tell us a little bit about District Attorney Ed Berberian. And your colleagues on the board have been analyzing his expenditures in the district attorney's office. And when compared to other counties, it appears that we're heavily staffed with a relatively low level of crime. And the suggestion is that he should divert more cases out of the courts. Tell us what your thoughts are about his budget. And are we going to be able to resolve these issues?
Good question, and I'm going to start by saying that Ed Berberian is an excellent district attorney. He and his team have done a great job of keeping Marin safe. We are a safe community for a lot of reasons, and part of it is because of a strong philosophy for prosecution and the rights of the victims, as well as finding restitution from the perpetrators. The issue that we have is that given all of the needs of our county and the relative low crime rates, when we look at other comparable counties, not big urban counties, but comparable suburban counties like our own, we see that we have more attorneys, and also we see that our prosecutorial policies around misdemeanors is different than many counties. So we're asking the district attorney to work with us to see what we can do. In fairness, I will say that over the last 3 years, he has removed several positions, and we agreed on the reduction of another position for this year. So we're looking forward as we continue to make the structural reforms we need to have a sustainable budget over time. And we're asking our criminal justice division, not just our district attorney, but also our public defender, to rein in the resources that their departments require. We've got 8 months before we're going to be in a showdown state, and I think that we've worked well together in the past, and I expect we'll do the same and find a fair outcome that protects the safety of our community.
Steve, you're going to be serving your 5th term. It starts at the beginning of the year. What are your goals for Marin and personally as you work through this particular term?
Sure. You know, I think that in the term that lies ahead, I'm going to be shifting some of my priorities. I have had a real heavy lifting role around transportation issues, and I think that for this next term I want to really address the issues of bringing equity into the equation, both in terms of our educational programs in the county, our social justice programs. I want to make sure that the safety net is more secure than it has been, because I think that there's a number of people who are falling behind on a day-to-day basis that we can do more for as a community, not just through government, but through community efforts. So I'm going to focus attention there. I think that affordable housing fits into that, and I see opportunities in San Quentin for that. Personally, you know, I've always been very attracted to the trails and the open space programs in our county, and I want to continue to make important connections for biking, hiking, walking, and equestrians.
Steve Kinsey, President of the Board of Supervisors. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
California reinstated the death penalty in 1978. San Quentin Death Row houses more than 700 men. Presently, executions are on hold by order of a federal judge who has found lethal injection procedures do not meet constitutional standards. Proposition 34 on this November's ballot would replace the death penalty with life in prison without the ability to be paroled. Death row inmates would be resentenced, they would be given life imprisonment, and they would have to work in prison. Proposition 34 would also set up a fund of $100 million for law enforcement earmarked to investigate murder and rape cases. For a discussion of Proposition 34, we invited Natasha Minsker, the campaign manager for the proposition. She is a graduate of Stanford Law and has been a death penalty lawyer and director of that project for the ACLU. Welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
Natasha, explain to us in about a minute why you support 34.
Voters should support Prop 34 because it will ensure that we never execute an innocent person here in California. It also makes convicted killers work in prison and pay restitution into the Victims' Compensation Fund. It will save the state of California hundreds of millions of dollars. The official independent analysis says Prop 34 will save $130 million every year for many years. It will also direct a total of $100 million to local law enforcement so we can solve more rape and murder cases. Prop 34 is justice that works for everyone.
Also with us is Phyllis Loya, who opposes Prop 34. Her son, Larry Lassiter, was a police officer who was killed on duty. Phyllis, thanks for joining us today, and tell us why you oppose Prop 34.
Well, I oppose Prop 34 for many reasons, primarily because it deprives families of murder victims the justice that a jury and judge in California gave them. That should not be taken away from us. Secondly, this argument about cost and about jobs in prison is really meant to deflect. The real issue is, do Californians want the death penalty preserved, or do they want it repealed? The initiative, when it talks about giving jobs, that's already the law. Murderers are already required to work. So that's nothing new. And if this one-time $100 million payout to law enforcement was so good, why is it that all of the law enforcement agencies are against Proposition 34.
But it does seem to me that there is a huge financial outlay and cost in California to prosecute the death penalty. It's estimated that more than $130 million is spent a year on prosecution of the death penalty, and billions since 1978. How will life without parole, that sentence, affect the costs that are now being spent on the prosecution of the death penalty, prosecution which results in death penalty?
It's really shocking to many people that the death penalty is more expensive than life without parole, because it's counterintuitive, but it actually is much more expensive to have the death penalty. That $130 million figure is the cost of the trials in death penalty cases, because there are actually 2 trials. There's a double trial process, more attorneys are involved, more investigators, specially qualified jurors are needed. The trial process takes 3 or 4 times as long as a regular murder case. But that's just the beginning. The appellate process in California literally takes 25 or 30 years, and we pay for defense attorneys, prosecutors, and judges. But the most surprising fact is that death row housing is more expensive than housing an inmate serving life without parole in the general prison population. And that's because death row inmates get special privileges. They get special private cells. Right now they don't work, and they sit around watching TV and talking to their lawyers, and they actually get special privileges. When we replace the death penalty with life without parole, those inmates go into the general prison population, and we actually save an enormous amount of money in prison housing costs just from that.
Phyllis, what's your comment on the cost issue?
Well, again, I don't think this debate should be centered on the cost issue.
All right, but can you discuss it with us for a moment, just so we get your point of view on the costs?
I think that the cost analysis that the proponents of this bill has are way off. Death penalty trials should be the most expensive trials because of how serious the punishment is. If the death penalty is eliminated, we're going to have all these life without possibility of parole trials, and they're going to be expensive too. What is infuriating to me as a victim is that the same people that are arguing it costs too much. For example, she talked about the cost of single selling. That was because these same people brought suits to force the Department of Corrections to single cell death row inmates. They create the cost and then say, wait a minute, it costs too much. Let's do away with it. No, that's not right. That's not justice.
I understand your position on the cost. Now, one of the primary arguments from proponents of capital punishment is that it deters crime. And I don't want to put you in any pain or ask you to relive your son's murder, but it's fair to say that he was killed while the death penalty was in effect with special circumstances. Everybody knows that if you kill a police officer, it triggers the special circumstance element of the law. So is it inappropriate to try to put a rational frame around an irrational act? Murder is not a rational act. And as I say, it's widely known that killing a police officer invokes the death penalty if you're convicted. So where is the deterrence?
It invokes the death penalty trial if you're convicted. It's not mandatory that anybody that kills a police officer is going to get the death penalty. That is what's decided in the penalty phase once they've been convicted of murder with special circumstance. I actually would like to talk about my son's case for a moment because you brought to mind something. You talk about deterrence. During the penalty phase of the trial, evidence was shown that the inmate that killed my son had written a kite, a jail letter, in which he talked about now that he had one under his belt, everything was different. He wanted to hurt someone. There are people on death row who have been convicted and received another death penalty for killing a death row inmate. Just because they're on death row doesn't mean they won't kill again. But I'll tell you, there's no one that's been executed that's killed again.
What's your position on the deterrent factor as it relates to the death penalty?
The research shows that what deters crime is catching people who commit crimes. Swift and certain punishment is the most important thing to deterring a crime. The actual severity of the punishment is not important. So if I'm going to actually think about whether to commit a murder, as you said, here in California, if I'm thinking about whether I actually kill someone, I'm not thinking through, am I going to get the death penalty or life without parole? That's not the question. The question is, am I going to get caught? Can I get away with this? And the shocking truth is that right now in California, 46% of murders go unsolved. That means almost half of the people who commit murder get away with it. If we want to deter murder, then we need to catch murderers and take them off the streets. That's what Prop 34 does. That's why it invests $100 million in local law enforcement specifically to address those 46% of murders and 56% of reported rapes that go unsolved in California every single year.
Phyllis, throughout the country there have been about 140 death row inmates who have been exonerated of the crimes that they were convicted of, including 3 in California. Are you comfortable with the idea that someone who may be innocent may be given the death penalty despite that innocence?
I think that we have so many layers of protection in California in the appellate law, and we have very good lawyers in California arguing these cases, that I don't think that there's any risk at all that an innocent person will be executed in California. There is no proof that an innocent person in California has been executed. If I could speak about this money going to law enforcement again, that is a one-time $100 million withdrawal from the general fund. And it's not even clear whether that is new money or redirected money. But there's lots of needs in California that $100 million could serve. And as I said, if that were so helpful to law enforcement, why is law enforcement not on the bandwagon for this?
If I can return to the question about innocence, it really is a very substantial issue. And with, for example, in Illinois, they cleared death row, and the governor commuted the sentence of those individuals there. And the appellate project in California that provides the legal services for those convicted with a death penalty is severely underfunded. And it's one of the reasons there's a huge backlog in the whole process of appealing death penalty convictions.
I agree with you completely, and the answer to that is, let's amend the death penalty. Let's fix it, not abolish it. There should be many more lawyers. There should not be the delays in the appeals. There are many things that we could do to move this process along. But again, my point is that the proponents of this bill are the ones that have set many of these roadblocks and delays. Every day that there's a delay in carrying out a death sentence is a day that their client's life is saved. Therefore, they have a perfect incentive to delay. And that's what's happening in California.
Natasha, where do you and the people who are in favor of 34 come in on this issue of exoneration and people who might be serving or facing death penalty and are innocent?
And if I can say who is supporting Prop 34, there are more than 400 murder victim family members who have endorsed and urged voters to support Prop 34, more than 100 law enforcement professionals, judges, prosecutors, police officers, correctional officials, including California Supreme Court justices who are retired. The initiative is supported by the California Democratic Party, the League of Women Voters, the California Conference of Bishops. Every major religious organization in the state supports Prop 34. So when we talk about the people behind this bill, behind this initiative, those are the people behind this initiative. And the fact that we might execute an innocent person in California is in fact the #1 reason most of those people have lined up to support Prop 34. It means that we will never be put at risk of executing an innocent person in this state.
Phyllis, help us understand the difference between justice and vengeance. And as a victim, you lost your son, and I have great compassion for that loss. But can the system ever help you recover from that loss?
Absolutely, because until a victim and their family gets justice, healing is delayed. You know, one thing I want to point out, my son served his country as a Marine captain. He lost his life serving his community as a police officer. He was shot. My bright son ended up with a brain, in his doctor's words, that was like soup. My son, at his death, was able to be an organ donor. He saved 5 people's lives by being an organ donor. What more could my son have possibly given the citizens of the state of California? Nothing. He gave all. Therefore, I have no hesitation in asking that the same citizens reject 34 and vote no.
Finally, I'd like to ask about the pattern across the country. 15 states have already abolished the death penalty, and around the world it's seen as a barbaric standard. Do you think that California should remain a death penalty state given the trends?
Absolutely. I certainly do. Not every trend is a good trend that you should follow. So yes, I do think that California should remain steadfast. And I'll tell you another thing that's is a very much concern to me. The fact that the initiative is saying that their sentence would be reduced to life without possibility of parole. I want to tell you that I have spent the last couple of years testifying in the state legislature against SB 399 and its clone, SB 9, which changed the life without possibility of parole sentencing options for killers who killed when they were 16 or 17. Now, after 15 years of serving that sentence, they will be allowed to seek a modification in their sentence to 25 to life. Now, there are some exemptions in that bill, so not every JLWOP offender is going to receive the benefit of that, but many will. Many of them who are multiple murders. I want to point out an example of one. His last name is Marquez. He is the oldest JLWOP offender in the California correctional system, and he originally had a death sentence. It was then changed to life without possibility of parole. Now he is going to be one of the first people that's eligible to have his sentence reduced to 25 to life.
Phyllis, thank you. We're tight on time. And Natasha, if you could give us just a 30-second response to that.
Thanks.
By voting yes on Prop 34, the voters ensure that the legislature cannot change life without parole for adult offenders. By voting yes on 34, it means that only a future vote of the voters could ever change the law. So if you support life without parole, you should vote yes on 34.
Natasha Minsker, Phyllis Loya, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
the opportunity. Thank you.